This video presentation is produced by the Lebanon Historical Society through the resources of the Leonard and Erica Sterk Resource Center. Lebanon farmers deliver cows to Germany, healing the wounds of war, was first presented to the Lebanon Historical Society in November of 2018. German-speaking Lutherans in the United States began relief efforts to aid starving children in post-World War I Germany. The efforts generated significant activity throughout the Middle West, including Lebanon, Wisconsin. 3 young men from Lebanon accompanied a shipment of dairy cows to Germany. From March through May of 1921, Vilas Bale, Ernst Winter, and Herb Christian were responsible for the care and maintenance of 28 cows donated by Lebanon farmers and 30 cows from Ixonia farmers. The Versailles Treaty, signed on June 28, 1919, officially ended World War I. The conditions of the treaty were so extreme that many believe it laid the groundwork for the eventual rise of National Socialism in Germany and the outbreak of World War II. Under provisions of the Versailles Treaty, Germany was required to make impossible cash payments to the Allies. Germany was also ordered to rebuild the herds of cattle, horses, sheep, goats, and other livestock in France and Belgium. In addition, they were to supply fodder for the cattle of France and Belgium. While Germany fulfilled these treaty obligations, excessive numbers of milk cows and breeding stock had to be deported from Germany. There were few cows left in Germany to supply milk for German children. Because the supplies of fodder to feed the animals that did remain in Germany were depleted, remaining herds of cattle had to be slaughtered. Hyperinflation in Germany was so severe that it took 7,400 Deutschmarks in order to purchase a single US dollar. As the pictures illustrate, it was cheaper to burn Deutschmarks than to buy wood for cooking and heating. A wheelbarrow load of Deutschmarks would purchase food for a family of 4 for a single day. German children found it cheaper to build kites with Deutschmarks than to buy kite paper. German children had not received adequate supplies of milk for 6 years. The death rate from tuberculosis had doubled since 1913. The infant mortality rate had also doubled since before the war. The inflationary spiral meant that cows available for purchase in Holland and Denmark were beyond the reach of German buyers. As a result, directors of orphanages and hospitals in Germany looked abroad for dairy cattle to meet the needs of starving children. Germany did not have enough milk, eggs, cheese, meat, and other things for its people. Starvation was gaining ground daily. Meanwhile, in America, widespread anti-German sentiment continued to dominate American opinion after the war. Information about conditions in Germany was suppressed. German-American Lutherans with family ties to Germany and Austria circulated information about starvation in Germany around the United States. Wherever there were enclaves of German-speaking people in America, Wisconsin, North and South Dakota, Nebraska, Kansas, and Texas, people were aware of the suffering in Germany. Many German Americans still had members of their immediate family living in Germany. The English language press, including the Watertown Daily Times, continued to feed anti-German sentiment. The war waged against German Lutherans in the United States, begun by President Wilson's propaganda machine in 1914, continued well into the 1920s. The sedition map, illustrated on this slide, dominated popular opinion in the United States, particularly in Wisconsin. Lebanon was still a target for anti-German discrimination. The Watertown Daily Times opined, "The quicker the last vestiges of Deutschtum are eliminated from our area, the better for all concerned." And another opinion in the comment or in the editorial section read, "The war will not be entirely or happily over for the United States until Prussianism shall be crushed within Germany's border as well as within our borders." While hundreds of thousands of German Americans were aware of the suffering in Germany and Austria, the American Red Cross forbade any of its American agencies to assist the German Red Cross. The German Red Cross appealed to the American Friends Service Committee of the Quaker Church, and they took up the cause of relief for Germany and Austria. When rumors that the American Red Cross was spearheading an effort to send dairy cows to Germany spread, the organization issued a swift denial. Quote, "It's not the American Red Cross. That organization has nothing to do with it in any shape or form. As near as we can find out, it is the German churches of the United States that are sending the cattle to the German people. Remember, the American Red Cross has nothing to do with this move." The American Dairy Cattle Company was a nonprofit agency created to work with the Quakers with the intent of delivering at least 4,000 head of dairy cows to Germany from America. Because of the anti-German sentiment before and during World War I, all evidence of the existence of this extraordinary effort and this company have been obliterated. The American Dairy Cattle Company refitted a Seattle-based ocean freighter to become a floating loafing barn, capable of holding 800 cows per trip. The refitted ship provided for onboard loafing and feeding of up to 800 cows. There were no stanchions for milking. 3 shipments were made to Germany in November of 1920, in February of 1921, and the last one in May of 1921 when the Lebanon cows were delivered. A total of approximately 2,200 head of milk cows were delivered by this route. The Lebanon cows were part of the final voyage. The designated route for the shipment included taking the Chicago Northwestern train from Lebanon to Chicago Calumet, Indiana yards. From the Calumet yards to Baltimore, they traveled on the Baltimore and Ohio Railroad. Before the men left Lebanon, word reached them that the trip was potentially dangerous, based upon the experience of South Dakota farmers whose cows were also en route to Chicago. South Dakota papers detail it as the Battle of the Cows. Bale and Christian were aware of the Battle of the Cows. They were aware that armed marauders, mostly veterans of the war, might try to stop the shipment at all cost. There was resistance in South Dakota. On Tuesday, the 22nd of March, 300 cows were stampeded by ruffians in 25 automobiles. Most of them were American Legion members, ex-servicemen. 29 cows were lost in the stampede. 1 was shot by the American Legion members. On Wednesday, the 23rd of March, 200 armed farmers guarded 350 cows in Scotland, South Dakota. They were approached by 30 carloads of ruffians. The local undertaker had been advised to have hearses ready for dead farmers. The sheriff warned the ruffians, "The first man crossing the fences will be met by at least 200 farmers with guns." On Thursday, March 24th, a large number of legionnaires, the paper said, headed for Kaler, South Dakota. They were outnumbered 4-1 by armed farmers. They dispersed without attacking. On Friday, March 25th, which happened to be Good Friday, the South Dakota governor was asked to intervene, but he refused. He said that he could not intervene in such an activity. The state sheriff, who was himself a German Lutheran, and the U.S. Marshal provided armed posses to protect the cows. It is reported that a large group of curiosity seekers and catcalling protesters taunted the farmers. There were even threats that mobsters were coming to poison the cows. 14 arrests were made, and it was found that those men were carrying poison indeed. They identified themselves as the same men who had stampeded the cows on Tuesday, and 4 of them were carrying weapons. On Saturday, March 26th, finally 700 cows were loaded onto 26 railroad cars in Tripp, South Dakota. The train was given priority over passenger trains en route to Sioux City, Iowa. That was an extraordinary measure because passenger trains were always given the primary opportunity to use the tracks. The legionnaires attempted to launch a legal battle to stop the shipment, but that failed. The Iowa division of the American Legion also issued a warning, but there were no incidents in Iowa. Finally, on March 28th, the train arrived safely in Hammond, Indiana, at the Calumet Chicago yards. There, they awaited shipment of another 58 cows from Lebanon and Ixonia. The ethnic connection to Germany was still very strong. Many Lebanon families still had close relatives living in the provinces of Prussia. Even without familial connection, Christian charity and the spirit of compassion for fellow Lutherans prevailed. The solicitation in Lebanon yielded 28 cows and funds to pay the railroad and ocean voyage transportation costs, and enough feed to ensure that the cows would be well fed when they were delivered to Bremen. Vilas Bale had first-hand knowledge of the post-war conditions in Germany from his service in the Marine Corps as part of the American Expeditionary Force. The Reverend Heinrich Gerke, a Missouri Synod pastor in South Dakota, had previously served as St. Peter of Lebanon. He had family living in Germany who made him aware of the deplorable conditions that existed there after the war. As the South Dakota donation was being organized, he informed his contacts in Lebanon about the planned shipment of cows. The Reverend William Lange, Ohio Synod pastor at Emmanuel Lutheran Church of Lebanon, had a brother living in Leipzig who wrote regularly about the starvation of German children. These men raised the alarm in Lebanon. Dr. August F. Ernst was the recently retired president of Northwestern College in Watertown and well known for his fundraising ability. He had strong ties to Lebanon and Ixonia. The farmers of Lebanon and Ixonia prevailed upon him to become the chief solicitor. H.R. Moldenhauer was arguably Lebanon's most prominent citizen. He owned the premier dairy herd, operated Lebanon's only creamery, and owned Lebanon's largest mercantile. These two men became the prime movers in leading this organization. The Komitee zur Sammlung der Notleidenden in Deutschland und Österreich was formed. the Solicitation Committee for the Relief of the Destitute in Germany and Austria. They were led by John Leto of Lebanon, who served as president, H.R. Moldenhauer, who served as secretary, C. Hugo Jacobi, a Watertown business owner and sympathetic to Lebanon, Karl Eske Sr., Ferdinand Genewuk, and of course Dr. Ernst, who served as chief solicitor. These are the men who were involved with cattle donations. Many of those family names are still found in Lebanon. Their grandchildren, great-grandchildren, and great-great-grandchildren still populate our Lebanon community. Not only did Lebanon Station in New Lebanon have a passenger depot, they also had a stockyard that was owned by Julius Schneider, local butcher and wheat trader. The farmers making donations of cattle, feed, and cash gathered in front of 2 cattle cars loaded with 58 head of Holsteins there at the Lebanon yards. The train left Lebanon on March 30th, 1921. Vilas Bale traveled with 1 carload of cattle, and Herb Christian with the other carload of cattle. Ernst Winter traveled by passenger train to Milwaukee and the North Shore Line to Hammond, Indiana, where he joined Bale and Christian. There was little mention made of this activity. The only mention made in the hostile Watertown Daily Times is the article that you see at the left. The Watertown Daily Times did not approve of this action by the Lebanon German Lutheran farmers. On the evening of March 30th, the Lebanon cows were joined together with nearly 800 cows that were arriving from South Dakota. They met at the Calumet Yards outside of Chicago. On April 1st, the cows were there at the yards and they were given ear tags and branded with the letter A on the left cheek. The health of the cows was to be tracked in Germany, and reports were to be provided to donors from the United States. The cows had to be milked twice a day, the train cars had to be bedded, and the cows had to be loaded on and offloaded. Milking required 2 men, one to hold the halter, the other to try to milk a moving cow. The men slept in Pullman cars, which were attached to the cattle train as the train waited in the yards. On April 3rd, they traveled as far as Connellsville, Pennsylvania, before they unloaded the cows for the evening. They milked the cows and reloaded them. They had to be unloaded again in the morning in Connellsville for the morning milking, and then reloaded for the duration of the trip to Baltimore. Ernst Winter writes to his wife Walda, "Tell those farmers that their cattle are the best and most praised stock on the train." The cowboys, as they called themselves, played cards on the train until they arrived in Baltimore, where they unloaded the cattle at the Baltimore stockyards. They milked the cows, and then they stayed in the stockyard hotel, which is pictured in the lower right-hand corner. Of the hotel, Ernst Winter observed, quote, "This is some place. We inspected the mattresses on the beds, found moths, lice, and other livestock." This was to be their home for 10 days, since the cattle were quarantined for inspection by a veterinary. This they had not expected. The cows then were fed copiously to prepare them for the strain of ocean travel. The cowboys visited the packing houses, they witnessed kosher butchering, and they traveled to the Baltimore shipyards while they were there. They were a curiosity in town, needless to say. Winter records, One of the kids on the street yelled to his playmates, "Run! Here come the wild cowboys from the west." The men played along with this illusion. Winter said, "We tell the younger kids that we eat snakes, and we tell them other Wild West BS." Twice daily, they milked the cows in the yards, watched the cows, quote, to keep out the children so they would not milk all the cows. The milk was given to the children who came with their containers to take milk home. Winter records, "Vilas and I received an invitation from the person to whom we have given part of the milk every day. In the evening, we had ice cream and butter made from milk of Lebanon cows. Who would have thought that we would receive something like this in Baltimore, Maryland?" Other kids who were receiving some of the milk are bringing beer and wine every morning and evening, Winter wrote. The men did journey downtown, and of course they stopped at Folly Burlesque to see a show there. They also visited the zoo and Druid Park. With long days of waiting between morning and evening milking in Baltimore, the men traveled from Baltimore to the District of Columbia via the interurban. Vilas commented that the Capitol, the White House, Washington Monument, and Arlington Cemetery were the highlights. Back in Baltimore, Ernst commented, "Vilas and Herb are going to a dance this evening. Guess I'll go and take in a movie and go to bed early and keep the bed bugs company. Ha ha," he wrote to his wife, Walda. Finally, on April 12th, they did the morning milking and then were ordered to rope the cattle and begin to load them. They were ordered to load the cattle with no instructions on where to tie the cows or actually how to manage the crates into which the cows were placed in order to bring them on board. They finally resolved it at 11:30 p.m. They slept on the ship with no blankets, almost froze in our bunks, according to Winter. As the ship left port that evening, the men were busy as bees for several hours dealing with cows that had been jostled while being loaded. And they were now in a completely foreign environment that included the pitching and rolling of the ship. Winter wrote, "Well, we are on our way. Had a poor start, as 2 cows died after we were on our way only 1 hour. Guess more will die before we get across, as a number were hurt while loading. They did not milk the cows that evening because it was too late by that time, but they did get the cattle settled. The adventure of milking awaited them the next morning." Vilas Bale was responsible for the care of 61 cows. He was kept busy pulling up hay and feed out of hatches with ropes. He commented that only farmers would understand what he accomplished twice each day. Each of the 61 cows required 3 to 5 pails of water with each watering during the day. At ages 22, 23, and 25, the Lebanon cowboys were among the 7 old men in the crowd, as Winter puts it. The other 25 are all young fellows. Nice bunch. He said, "We 3 from Wisconsin are considered favorites by the American Dairy Cattle Company. Our cows will be placed in the best place and the handiest part of the ship as far as feeding, watering, and milking is concerned." Ernst and Herb were assigned milking duties. Milk from the Lebanon cows was used by the cooks in the galley of the ship. The rest of the milk was poured overboard twice daily. Each day there were dead cows to be thrown overboard. A total of 86 cows, 2 of those from Lebanon, died en route. Some 40 calves were born, half of which survived the ordeal of the sea travel. Milking was a dangerous ordeal since the cows became seasick and could not stand still because of the choppy water. Often the men were as seasick as the cows. Vilas had a bout of severe seasickness. He went for several days without eating and was restricted to his bunk for a time. There were other hazards, as Ernst wrote to his wife. "I was kicked by a cow this morning, a kick that I will not soon forget. Still, I also pity the cow." At one point, a storm raising 80-foot waves sent water into the cattle hold and through the portholes. Cattle nearly washed off the ship. The gales, storms, rain, and cold affected the cows and cowboys with equal vengeance. At left, you will see Vilas smoking a cigar after his extended ordeal of seasickness. Ernst and Vilas are standing on the deck of the ship, and then we see Ernst in the restricted area of the ship. No cattlemen allowed on this deck, and there he was. The men began to forego shaving because the salt water was too hard on their faces. Between the first photo and the second, Vilas lost his cap in one of the gales. On the right, he has his new hat. Ernst wrote, "Milking is some dirty job, as the cows are very dirty and the manure cannot be cleaned away. 18 days' worth of cow manure, generated by over 700 cows, remained in the cargo bay when they arrived in Germany." The contract that the men had signed indicated that the shipping company would have the freighter cleaned before the men set sail for home. Wrong. Ernst noted that when they weren't working, there was nothing to do, and the rough seas made for many sleepless nights. The men did get together to sing, and the photos suggest that the singing may have improved as the hours passed. After 18 days on a ship without a bath, the first stop was a Bierstube for a couple of beers, then to a bathhouse to have a bath, and then finally a grand tour on a private train that took them throughout Germany. The Lebanon cowboys had a glorious joyride around Germany by train, riverboat, and even an airplane, all compliments of the municipal governments of the cities they visited. They stayed either in first-class hotels or in luxury sleeping cars on their private train. The 4 B's included Bad, public bath, beer, plenty of beer, Bett, comfortable beds, beten, and 2 opportunities for prayer, beten, and worship in historic German cathedrals. They ate at some of the finest establishments in post-war Germany. It was the intent of the German authorities to impress upon these young men that there was still horrible suffering going on in Germany. Even though Germany was making progress, the progress was mainly because of the unsanctioned German-American Lutheran relief efforts. It was hoped that these young men would return to America as goodwill ambassadors to counteract the unconscionable bigotry that remained in America with regard to Germany and Austria. They came face to face with famine, starving school children, bread lines for adults and children, and women pressed into manual labor, carrying hay and loading manure, because so many men had been killed and maimed in the war. These photos illustrate the orphanage in Leipzig, where more than 800 war-orphaned children had to be fed each day. Supplies arrived by the wagon load to be cooked in the mammoth kitchen with its giant copper pots. However, with no milk, the children continued to barely survive. Heinrich Lange of Leipzig wrote to his brother, Reverend Wilhelm Lange, in Lebanon in the summer of 1921. He wrote that Leipzig received all 26 of the surviving Lebanon cows, 20 of which were owned by the city to guarantee a supply of milk to its orphanages and hospitals. The other 6 were divided between 2 rural orphanages just outside of Leipzig. The Americans were given a tour of Leipzig by Reverend Lange's niece, the only woman in this photo, pictured just below the photo of Reverend Lange. The terms of their contract were violated by the ship's captain. They were required to clean up the entire ship on the return voyage, 18 days of manure produced by nearly 800 cows and calves. Everything had to be scrubbed, even the pens and stalls, which would be dismantled as soon as the ship was returned to Seattle. The Lebanon cowboys lodged a protest at the American Dairy Cattle Company, headquartered in Chicago, but to no avail. They were never compensated for their uncontracted labor. They returned, frustrated, but happy to be back in Lebanon. Their adventure was largely forgotten because of the anti-German prejudice so prevalent in America. Only the Watertown Weltbürger, the German-language newspaper, gave notice of their journey and safe return. The Watertown Daily Times makes no mention of it whatsoever. All records of the American Dairy Cattle Company have been destroyed. The U.S. government systematically destroyed all legal documents related to this venture, including IRS documents. We know about it only because Vilas Bale and Ernst Winter kept diaries, and Ernst Winter retained his IRS documents and letters that he exchanged with the American Cattle Company.